She tripped into his arms at the ball. His grandmother announced the engagement immediately. The candles were melting. Penelope Hartwell noticed such things, the small imperfections that no one else seemed to see, the crooked picture frames and the slightly wilted flowers, and the way Lady Brightmore's butler always missed a single spot when polishing the silver candlesticks in the drawing room. Tonight, preparing for the Duchess of Harrington's spring ball, she found herself fixating on the candles flanking her borrowed vanity mirror, watching the wax drip unevenly down their sides and pool on the brass holders beneath. "You're wool-gathering again?" Molly, the maid Lady Brightmore had assigned to attend her, tugged firmly at the laces of Penelope's corset. "And you'll need to breathe sometime tonight, miss. So tell me now if it's too tight." "It's fine." Penelope drew an experimental breath. The corset compressed her ribs just enough to remind her of its presence, but she could still fill her lungs adequately. She would need that breath tonight for dancing, for laughing, for the endless stream of witty observations she would deploy like weapons against anyone who might look too closely at her. The green silk, then. Molly was already moving toward the wardrobe, where Penelope's modest collection of gowns hung like soldiers awaiting orders. "Lady Brightmore said the green brings out your eyes." "Lady Brightmore is very kind." Penelope watched her reflection in the mirror, the auburn hair that Molly was attempting to tame into something fashionable, the brown eyes that Lady Brightmore apparently thought needed bringing out, the freckles that no amount of powder could entirely conceal. "But the blue, I think. The green makes me look like I'm trying too hard." "Begging your pardon, miss, but isn't that rather the point? Of the season, I mean?" Penelope laughed despite herself. "The point, Molly, is to try extremely hard while appearing not to try at all. It's exhausting, really. Like being an actress in a play that never ends, except the audience is also performing, and everyone is simultaneously watching and being watched, and if you forget your lines for even a moment—" She caught herself. "The blue silk, please." Molly retrieved the gown without further comment, though her expression suggested she had opinions about young ladies who philosophized while their hair was still half-pinned. The blue silk was Penelope's finest dress, purchased with money her father had sent specifically for this purpose, and it represented something she tried not to think about too carefully. Hope. Not hope for love. Penelope had long ago dismissed such romantic notions as impractical. Her parents' marriage was comfortable and affectionate, built on mutual respect and shared goals, and she had always assumed she would find something similar. A partnership, an arrangement, a man who needed her family's money and could offer social position in return, who would treat her kindly enough and expect nothing more than a well-run household and presentable heirs. This was her third season, and her prospects were dimming. The first year, she had been a novelty, the pretty merchant's daughter with the quick wit and the refreshing lack of pretension. Men had danced with her, flirted with her, enjoyed her company at dinner parties. But when it came time for proposals, they had looked elsewhere. The second year, she had tried harder, softening her opinions, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, pretending interest in subjects that bored her senseless. Still nothing. Now, at 23, she was becoming something worse than unsuitable. She was becoming old news. "Hold still," Molly commanded, wrestling with a particularly stubborn curl. "Honestly, miss, your hair has a mind of its own." "It gets that from me." I'd noticed. The gown slid over her head in a whisper of silk, and Penelope felt herself transforming. This was the part she had learned to love. In a complicated way, the ritual of preparation, the deliberate construction of a version of herself designed to charm and disarm. The real Penelope Hartwell was uncertain, lonely and increasingly desperate. The Penelope who would enter the Duchess of Harrington's ballroom tonight was confident, amusing, and entirely self-possessed. She adjusted the neckline of her gown, modest but not prudish, revealing just enough collarbone to be interesting, and examined her reflection critically. Her mother's pearls circled her throat. Her hair was finally cooperating, swept up and back with a few strategic curls, softening the severity. Her cheeks had enough natural colour that rouge would be excessive. "You look beautiful, miss." Molly's voice had softened. "If I may say so." "You may, and I thank you for it." Penelope smiled at the maid's reflection. "Even if we both know that beautiful is not quite what's required." "What is required, then?" Penelope considered the question. "Acceptable, appropriate. Unexceptional enough to be safe, but not so unexceptional as to be forgettable." She turned from the mirror. "I need to be exactly interesting enough that a man believes marrying me would be pleasant, but not so interesting that he worries I might embarrass him." "That sounds—" Molly paused, clearly searching for diplomacy. "Dispiriting?" "Yes." Penelope gathered her gloves and reticule. "But it is what it is, and I am what I am, and tonight I shall be charming and witty and perfectly calibrated for maximum marriageability. Wish me luck." "Luck, miss." Molly bobbed a curtsy. "And perhaps a bit of magic, too." "Magic?" Penelope repeated, laughing as she swept toward the door. "In a London ballroom? One would have better odds finding a unicorn." The Duchess of Harrington's spring ball was, as expected, a crush. Penelope had learned the vocabulary of society events during her first season. Crush meant crowded, squeeze meant impossibly crowded, and sad squeeze meant that too many people had accepted invitations and everyone was miserable but pretending otherwise. Tonight qualified as a proper crush. Enough guests to create energy and spectacle, but still room to breathe and move and actually dance when the music began. Lady Brightmoor had already been absorbed into a circle of her contemporaries, older women who gathered like generals planning campaigns and surveyed the younger generation with knowing eyes. She had performed the necessary introductions, reminded Penelope of which gentlemen were suitable and which were fortune hunters, and then released her charge into the wild with instructions to "be sensible, for heaven's sake, and don't say anything too clever." Penelope had been saying clever things since before she could walk, and she had no intention of stopping now. It was her only weapon in a battlefield where other women carried the heavy artillery of noble blood and impressive dowries. If she could not compete on those terms, she could at least be memorable. The ballroom itself was magnificent acres of polished floor, reflecting hundreds of candles, towering arrangements of hothouse flowers perfuming the air, an orchestra tuning their instruments on a raised dais at the far end. Penelope allowed herself a moment of pure appreciation for the beauty of it all, the way the candlelight caught the jewels around women's throats and the gilt on the ceiling mouldings, the way the colours of 100 gowns blended into something almost like a garden. Then she put on her public face and went to work. "Miss Hartwell." Lady Caroline Pembroke materialized at her elbow, all blonde ringlets and pale pink silk. "I had so hoped you would be here tonight. Did you hear about the Thornbury situation?" Penelope had not, which meant she was already behind on the evening's gossip. She arranged her features into an expression of mild interest. "I'm afraid I've been woefully uninformed. Do enlighten me." "The Dowager Marchioness." Lady Caroline's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's announced that she will disinherit Lord Thornbury if he does not become engaged by the end of this season. Can you imagine? Her own grandson. How dramatic, isn't it? Everyone is speculating about who he might choose, though of course he's rejected absolutely everyone so far. Lady Anne Westbrook, Miss Elizabeth Fairchild, even the Duke of Montfort's daughter, and she's practically perfect." Lady Caroline sighed with theatrical distress. "They call him the Marble Marquis, you know, because he never shows any emotion at all. It's rather tragic, really." Penelope made an appropriate sound of sympathy while scanning the room. She had heard of Lord Sebastian Ashworth, Marquis of Thornbury. Everyone had heard of him. He was one of those figures who existed more as concept than person, a collection of rumors and assumptions rather than a flesh-and-blood man. Impossibly wealthy, impossibly cold, impossible in every sense of the word. "Is he here tonight?" She wasn't sure why she asked. The Marquis of Thornbury was so far beyond her sphere that she might as well have inquired about the Prince Regent. "Oh, yes. His grandmother insisted, apparently. She's making him parade before all the eligible young ladies like a prize stallion." Lady Caroline giggled. "Though a stallion would probably show more warmth. He's over there, in the corner, looking as though he wishes everyone would burst into flames." Penelope followed Lady Caroline's gaze and found him immediately. He was, she had to admit, impressive. Tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained slightly against the exquisite tailoring of his evening coat. Dark hair that seemed to resist its careful styling, one lock falling across a forehead that might have been sculpted from marble. And his face. His face was beautiful in the way that winter was beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, a firm jaw, a mouth that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. His grey eyes swept the room with an expression of such profound boredom that Penelope felt a flash of irritation on behalf of everyone present. How dare he look so contemptuous? He was a marquis, for heaven's sake. He had everything: wealth, title, power, a face that would make angels weep. And yet he stood there in his corner, radiating displeasure, as though being surrounded by people who wanted to marry him was the greatest hardship imaginable. "He looks miserable," she observed. "He always looks miserable," Lady Caroline confirmed. "Though I suppose if one's grandmother was publicly threatening disinheritance, one might be forgiven for a bit of sulking." The Dowager Marchioness was easier to spot once Penelope knew what to look for. She held court near the fireplace, a small woman with white hair and sharp dark eyes. Her posture ramrod straight despite her obvious age. She wore black mourning, still, for a husband who had died nearly 15 years ago, and diamonds that caught the light like weapons. Even from across the room, Penelope could see the family resemblance. The Dowager had the same arresting bone structure as her grandson, the same air of cool command. But where his face was closed and cold, hers was animated with something that might have been mischief. She was clearly enjoying herself immensely. "I suppose we should feel sorry for him," Penelope said, though she didn't feel sorry at all. "Being forced to marry must be terribly inconvenient." "You don't like him." "I don't know him. I simply think that a man with his advantages might show a bit more grace about the minor imposition of choosing a wife from among the most beautiful and accomplished women in England." Lady Caroline laughed. "Oh, Miss Hartwell, I had forgotten how entertaining you are. Perhaps I should introduce you. It might do him good to speak to someone who isn't terrified of him." "Absolutely not." The words came out more vehemently than Penelope intended. "I mean, there's no purpose to such an introduction. We move in entirely different circles. He would see me as a curiosity at best, and an imposition at worst. But think of the story you'd have to tell afterward." "I have plenty of stories already." Penelope softened her refusal with a smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I see Lady Brightmoor trying to catch my attention. Probably wants to introduce me to someone suitable and sensible, a second son, perhaps, or a respectable widower." She escaped before Lady Caroline could protest, weaving through the crowd toward a corner of the room that was, crucially, as far from the Marquis of Thornbury as physically possible. She had no desire to become one of the hopeful young ladies parading before him. Let someone else be dismissed with that cold grey gaze. She was, she reminded herself firmly, not in his league. Not even close. 3 hours later, Penelope's feet ached, her face hurt from smiling, and she had successfully deflected the advances of Mr. Harold Simpkins, a perfectly respectable man with a prosperous estate in Hampshire, and absolutely nothing interesting to say about anything at all. It wasn't that she wanted to marry someone interesting precisely. She simply wanted to have one conversation, just one, that didn't make her want to scream with boredom. Was that too much to ask? Apparently, yes. The ballroom had grown warmer as the evening progressed, bodies generating heat that the open windows couldn't quite disperse. Penelope found herself drifting toward the edges of the room, seeking cooler air and a moment of solitude. She had done her duty, danced 3 times, made pleasant conversation, smiled at the appropriate moments. Surely she had earned a brief respite. She found a spot near one of the tall windows, half hidden behind a towering arrangement of roses and lilies. The flowers smelled heavenly, and the breeze from the window cooled her flushed cheeks. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe. Escaping as well. I see. Penelope startled at the male voice and turned to find Mr. George Pemberton, a gentleman she had danced with earlier, standing much too close. His breath smelled of wine, and his smile had shifted from charming to something that made her instincts prickle with warning. "Simply catching my breath," she said lightly. "The room has grown rather warm." "Indeed it has." He moved closer. "Perhaps you would care to take a turn on the terrace. The night air is quite refreshing." "I think not, Mr. Pemberton. Lady Brightmoor would not approve of me stepping outside unchaperoned." "Lady Brightmoor is occupied with her friends." His hand reached for her elbow. "And surely a woman of your background is not so concerned with propriety as all that." Penelope felt the familiar cold anger that accompanied such comments. The assumption that because her family was in trade, she must be less virtuous, less worthy of respect. She had encountered it before, though rarely so boldly. "A woman of my background," she said, her voice dropping to ice, "is precisely as concerned with propriety as any other. Perhaps more so, since people like you seem determined to test it." Mr. Pemberton's face darkened. "There's no need for that tone." "There's every need." She stepped backward, putting distance between them. "Excuse me." She turned and walked away quickly, not caring if he thought her rude. Better to be rude than to be cornered on a terrace by a man who had clearly decided that merchants' daughters were fair game. Her heel caught on the hem of her gown. It happened so quickly she barely had time to register the lurch of her stomach as she pitched forward, arms pinwheeling helplessly, a completely undignified squeak escaping her throat. She was going to fall in the middle of the Duchess of Harrington's ballroom, in front of everyone. She was going to fall flat on her face and become a laughingstock. Strong arms caught her. She collided with a chest as solid as a wall, hands gripping her shoulders and steadying her before she could complete her ignominious descent to the floor. For a breathless moment, she was pressed against warm fabric and hard muscle, close enough to smell sandalwood and something darker, something that made her pulse stutter in a way that had nothing to do with the near fall. Then she looked up and met the cold grey eyes of the Marquis of Thornbury. Oh no, 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 no. Of all the people in this ballroom, of all the chests she might have crashed into, why did it have to be his? The marble Marquis himself, looking down at her with an expression of faint surprise that was rapidly curdling into something much less friendly. She tried to step back, but her feet seemed to have forgotten how to operate. "I am so terribly sorry I tripped my hem." "So I observed." His voice was as cold as his eyes, and his hands had not released her shoulders. Penelope was suddenly, acutely aware of how close they were standing. She could see the individual threads of his cravat, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his eyebrows drew together in what appeared to be profound irritation. "If you could," she gestured vaguely. "I believe I have my balance now." He released her immediately, as though touching her had been distasteful. Penelope felt a flush of mortification spread across her cheeks. Of course he found her distasteful. She was nobody, a merchant's daughter who had just thrown herself at him like some kind of desperate Sebastian. The voice cut through Penelope's spiraling panic like a knife through silk. She turned to find the Dowager Marchioness of Thornbury approaching them with remarkable speed for a woman of her age, her dark eyes gleaming with something that looked alarmingly like delight. "Grandmother." The Marquis's tone suggested he would rather be anywhere else on earth. "This is not—" "Not what?" "Not the most romantic thing I have witnessed in years." The dowager's smile was wide and predatory. "A young lady tumbling into your arms. It's practically out of a novel." "She tripped," Lord Thornbury said flatly. "On her dress. It was an accident." "Providence, more like." The dowager had reached them now, and she was examining Penelope with an intensity that made Penelope want to check whether she had something stuck in her teeth. "And who might you be, my dear?" "Miss Penelope Hartwell, my lady." The words came out automatically, years of training overriding her panic. "I am a guest of Lady Brightmoor, and I must sincerely apologize for the disturbance. I am not usually so clumsy." "Hartwell." The dowager rolled the name around as though tasting it. "Hartwell. Not one of the Norfolk Hartwells, I presume?" "No, my lady. My father is a merchant. He owns several shipping concerns." She waited for the dowager's interest to evaporate, as interest usually did when she revealed her background. Instead, the old woman's smile grew even wider. A merchant's daughter. How wonderfully unconventional. She turned to her grandson, who had gone very still. "Don't you think, Sebastian? Wonderfully unconventional." "I think," Lord Thornbury said through gritted teeth, "that this young lady deserves an apology for being accosted, and then she should be allowed to return to her party." "Accosted? She fell into your arms, dear boy. There was nothing accosting about it." The dowager clapped her hands together once, sharply, and the sound seemed to carry across the entire ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please." Penelope's blood ran cold. "My lady, I really don't think—" "Nonsense, child. When happy news arrives, one must share it immediately." The dowager's voice rang out across the suddenly silent room. "I am delighted to announce the engagement of my grandson, Lord Sebastian Ashworth, Marquis of Thornbury, to Miss Penelope Hartwell." The silence stretched for one eternal heartbeat. Then the room erupted into chaos. Penelope couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She could only stand there, frozen, while hundreds of faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from shock to envy to outright disbelief. She felt Lord Thornbury go rigid beside her, his fury radiating off him in waves that were almost physical. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She had tripped on her dress. She had literally tripped on her dress and fallen into a stranger's arms. And now she was apparently engaged to a marquis in front of every person who mattered in London society. "Smile," the dowager hissed in her ear, "or everyone will know something is wrong." Penelope smiled. It was the most artificial expression her face had ever produced, but she smiled, and beside her, Lord Thornbury did something that might charitably be described as the same. The crowd began to converge on them, a wave of congratulations and curious questions, and Penelope felt Lord Thornbury's hand close around her elbow firmly, but not painfully. "We need to talk," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Now." "Agreed," she managed, through her frozen smile. He steered her through the approaching crowd with surprising grace, ignoring the well-wishers who reached for them, cutting a path toward a door at the side of the ballroom. People parted before him like water before a ship's prow, and within moments they were through the door and into a small antechamber beyond. The door closed behind them, cutting off the noise and chaos. They were alone. "What?" Lord Thornbury said, his voice low and dangerous. "The hell was that?" The antechamber was small and sparsely furnished, a fainting couch, a small table with a vase of flowers, 2 chairs that looked as though they hadn't been sat in for decades. A single candle burned on the table, casting flickering shadows across the walls and across Lord Thornbury's face. That face, Penelope noted through her haze of shock, was no longer cold. It was absolutely furious. "I don't know," she said, and was horrified to hear her voice shake. "I don't know what that was." "I tripped. I fell, and then your grandmother. My grandmother has been trying to marry me off for 10 years. He paced the small room like a caged animal. 10 years of schemes and machinations, and eligible young ladies thrust in my path at every opportunity. But this— He laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. This is bold even for her. I didn't plan this. I know you didn't. He stopped pacing and looked at her properly for the first time, his grey eyes assessing. No offence, Miss Hartwell, but you are hardly the type of woman my grandmother would choose for me. None taken. The words came out more sharply than she intended. I assure you, Lord Thornbury, I had no designs on your person. I have never had designs on your person. I would not have designs on your person if you were the last man in England. His eyebrows rose slightly. How flattering. I mean— She pressed her hands to her heated cheeks. I mean that I am not in the habit of throwing myself at aristocrats. The only reason I ended up in your arms is because I was fleeing an overly familiar gentleman, and my wretched hem betrayed me. Fleeing whom? Mr. George Pemberton. He seemed to think my background made me available. Something flickered in Lord Thornbury's eyes, something that might have been anger, though not directed at her. Pemberton. Yes, he has a reputation. As do you, my lord, though I was rather hoping to avoid making your acquaintance entirely. Were you? You're famous for being unpleasant. Why would I seek you out? Another almost laugh, this one slightly less bitter. A fair point, Miss Hartwell. I am indeed unpleasant, which is why we need to undo this disaster as quickly as possible. Agreed. Penelope's mind was beginning to work again, the initial shock receding enough to allow rational thought. We simply need to inform everyone that your grandmother was mistaken, that there is no engagement. If only it were that simple. He resumed his pacing. My grandmother announced our engagement to the entire Harrington ball. By tomorrow, it will be in every gossip column in London. If we deny it now, the scandal will be— Bad for you, yes, I understand. Penelope's voice hardened. You would be seen as a cad, toying with an innocent young woman's affections. How terrible for your reputation. I don't give a damn about my reputation. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I'm thinking of yours, Miss Hartwell. If we deny this engagement, you will be the one who suffers. The whispers, the speculation about what exactly happened in that ballroom, a woman of your background cannot afford such scandal. The truth of it hit her like a slap. He was right. Of course he was right. A marquis could weather rumours, a merchant's daughter could not. If they announced now that the engagement was a misunderstanding, society would conclude that she had thrown herself at him, been rejected, and was now desperately trying to salvage her reputation. She would be ruined. Then what do you suggest? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging the carefully styled lock that had been falling across his forehead. I need to think. I need to speak to my grandmother and discover what exactly she thinks she's— The door opened. The Dowager Marchioness swept in with all the inevitability of a force of nature, her black skirts rustling, her diamond earrings swinging. She closed the door behind her with a decisive click and turned to face them with an expression of utter satisfaction. Ah, she said, I see you've retreated to strategize. How sensible of you both. Grandmother. Lord Thornbury's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. What have you done? What I have been trying to do for a decade, Sebastian. I have found you a bride. By announcing a false engagement to a complete stranger in front of half the ton. The best schemes require bold action. The Dowager settled herself in one of the dusty chairs as though she were taking a seat in her own drawing-room. And Miss Hartwell is not a complete stranger. She is the daughter of Thomas Hartwell, one of the wealthiest merchants in England. She has been sponsored this season by my old friend Lady Brightmoor, who speaks of her with great affection, and she has, if I am not mistaken, a certain spark that has been notably absent from the young ladies you have so thoroughly rejected." "I didn't reject them because they lacked spark," Lord Thornbury said through gritted teeth. "I rejected them because I have no intention of marrying anyone." "Yes, well, we both know why that is, don't we?" The Dowager's eyes sharpened. "And we both know it cannot continue forever. You need an heir, Sebastian. You need a wife. And since you refuse to choose one yourself, I have chosen one for you. You cannot force me to marry." "No, I cannot," the Dowager smiled. "But I can make the alternative extremely uncomfortable. You will maintain this engagement for 1 month, Sebastian. You will court Miss Hartwell properly, attend events together, give every appearance of a genuine attachment, and at the end of that month, if you still wish to end things," she spread her hands, "you may do so with my blessing. And if I refuse, then I will disinherit you immediately and leave my entire personal fortune to your cousin Reginald." The silence that followed was absolute. Penelope watched Lord Thornbury's face cycle through several emotions: shock, fury, and something that looked almost like fear, before settling into a cold mask that revealed nothing at all. "You wouldn't," he said. "Try me. Your personal fortune is the Hartley estate, the trust for—" He cut himself off abruptly, glancing at Penelope as though suddenly remembering she was there. "Indeed." The Dowager's voice was soft but implacable. "The trust that secures certain futures I know you value. You cannot risk it, Sebastian, and we both know it." Something was happening here that Penelope didn't understand. Some undercurrent of meaning flowing between grandmother and grandson that carried weight far beyond the immediate situation. Lord Thornbury had gone very still, his hands clenched at his sides, and she saw something flicker in his eyes that looked almost like desperation. "And what of Miss Hartwell?" He turned to her, and for the first time his voice held something other than cold anger. "You would drag her into this charade as well. She has no part in our family drama. Miss Hartwell has a great deal to gain from this arrangement." The Dowager turned her sharp gaze on Penelope. 1 month as the betrothed of a marquis. Doors opened, invitations extended, her family's standing elevated beyond what a mere merchant's fortune could achieve. And at the end of it, if the engagement ends, it ends by mutual agreement, no scandal, no shame. She returns to her life with her reputation not only intact, but enhanced. Penelope should refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to extricate herself from this bizarre situation and return to her ordinary life of ordinary prospects. She didn't belong in whatever game the Thornburys were playing. She was a pawn at best, a prop at worst. But the Dowager was right. A month as Lord Thornbury's intended would change everything. Every hostess in London would want to know the woman who had captured the marble marquis. Her family's name would appear in every society column, associated not with trade but with nobility. Even if the engagement ended, she would be better positioned than she had ever been. And if she refused, if she exposed the Dowager's scheme now, she would be ruined anyway. Pitied at best, mocked at worst. The merchant's daughter, who had dreamed above her station and been publicly humiliated. She looked at Lord Thornbury, whose grey eyes watched her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "Why would you agree to this?" she asked quietly. "What hold does she have over you?" His jaw tightened. "That is none of your concern. If I'm to be your false bride for a month, I believe it is very much my concern. Miss Hartwell—" He stopped, clearly struggling with something. "There are matters, family matters, things I cannot risk losing for the sake of my pride." "Sebastian is a good man," the Dowager said, surprising Penelope with the softness of her tone. "He believes he is cold and hard and incapable of love, but I know better, and I believe, Miss Hartwell, that you might be exactly what he needs." "I don't need anything," Lord Thornbury snapped. "You need someone who isn't afraid of you. Someone who will speak plainly and see past your defences." The Dowager rose from her chair. "I have watched you for 10 years, Sebastian, pushing away everyone who might care for you. I am old, and I am tired, and I refuse to die knowing you will spend the rest of your life alone." "Grandmother, 1 month." She cut him off. "1 month, and you may have your freedom back. Both of you." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Think of it as a performance, if you like. But I have hopes. I have considerable hopes that it might become something more." She left before either of them could respond, the door closing behind her with an air of finality. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Penelope found she couldn't look at Lord Thornbury directly. Instead, she studied the faded wallpaper, the flickering candle, the dust motes floating in the air, anything but the man whose false bride she had apparently agreed to become. "You don't have to do this." His voice was quieter now, the anger drained away to reveal something that sounded almost like uncertainty. Penelope risked a glance at his face and found his expression surprisingly open, his grey eyes watching her with something that wasn't quite the cold contempt she had expected. "I think I do." She surprised herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Your grandmother was right about one thing I cannot afford, the scandal of a broken engagement, and a month of pretending to be attached to you seems a small price to pay for avoiding ruin. You might find the price higher than you expect. I am not good company. I have been told I am cold and difficult and incapable of normal human feeling." "By whom?" "By everyone who has ever had the misfortune to know me." Penelope considered this. "And is it true?" He seemed thrown by the question. "What? Is it true? Are you cold and difficult and incapable of feeling?" His laugh was bitter. "Ask anyone in that ballroom. They will confirm it enthusiastically." "I'm not asking anyone in that ballroom. I'm asking you." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Penelope held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to be intimidated by his title or his reputation or his cold grey eyes. If she was going to pretend to be engaged to this man, she needed to know what she was dealing with. "I am cold," he said finally. "I have cultivated coldness deliberately because the alternative—" He stopped. "The alternative is not something I care to discuss. And yet we are to be engaged for a month. Surely some discussion is warranted. Miss Hartwell." He stepped closer, and she caught his scent again, sandalwood and something darker. "I do not know what my grandmother is planning. I do not know why she has chosen you for this scheme, though I suspect it has something to do with your refusal to be intimidated by me. But I can promise you one thing. I will not allow this false engagement to harm you. When the month is over, I will ensure you emerge with your reputation intact and your prospects improved." "And what of your prospects?" "I have no interest in marriage. I never have." "Why?" His expression shuttered. "That is not your concern." "You keep saying that." Penelope heard the edge in her own voice and didn't bother to soften it. "But if I'm to play your intended for a month, I need to understand who you are, or at least who you want me to believe you are. I want you to believe I am exactly what I appear, a cold, unfeeling man who has no interest in love or marriage or anything beyond his own concerns." His smile was thin and humorless. "That shouldn't be difficult to convey. And if I don't believe it, then you are more foolish than you appear." They stood there, barely a foot apart, the candlelight flickering between them. Penelope could feel the warmth radiating off his body, could see the pulse beating in his throat, could almost taste the tension in the air. He was lying. She didn't know how she knew it, but she knew it as certainly as she knew her own name. Beneath all that ice, something was burning, something hot and desperate and carefully, deliberately suppressed. 1 month, she said. 1 month. And then we part ways. The engagement ends by mutual agreement, as your grandmother said, and we return to our separate lives. Yes. And in the meantime we... She trailed off, uncertain. What, exactly? What does a false engagement require? Public appearances, dancing at balls, sitting together at dinners, being seen in the park. My grandmother will expect me to call on you, to send flowers, to do all the things a proper suitor would do. And in private? Something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been heat, quickly suppressed. In private, we need not pretend anything at all. You may despise me as thoroughly as you like, and I will not take offense. I don't despise you. The words surprised her. I find you baffling and infuriating. And your grandmother is clearly a menace, but despise seems rather strong for an acquaintance of 30 minutes. Give it time. I tend to grow on people in the worst possible way. Despite everything, Penelope felt her lips twitch. Was that a joke, my lord? An observation. I am incapable of humour. Now that I don't believe. For a moment, just a moment, his mask slipped. She saw surprise in his eyes, and something else, something that might have been the beginning of warmth. Then it was gone, locked away behind walls that had clearly been years in the building. We should return to the ballroom, he said. Our absence will be noted, and my grandmother will expect us to perform our roles. Our roles? Penelope gathered herself. The besotted young couple, newly engaged. Can you manage it? My lord, I have been performing since I was old enough to curtsy. I have smiled at bores, laughed at tedious jokes, and pretended interest in topics that made me want to scream with boredom. I think I can manage to pretend affection for a man who is, at the very least, interesting to look at. His eyebrows rose. Interesting to look at? You are aware that you're handsome. Don't pretend otherwise. I wasn't aware that you had noticed. I notice everything. It's a flaw. She smoothed her skirts, checked that her hair was still presentable, and lifted her chin. Shall we? He offered his arm. She took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath his sleeve, and tried not to think about how strange this was, how utterly, impossibly strange, to be walking arm in arm with a marquis she had met less than an hour ago, about to pretend to the world that they were in love. At the door he paused. Miss Hartwell? Yes? He looked down at her, and for just a moment she saw something unguarded in his eyes, something almost vulnerable. Thank you, he said, for not running away screaming. Most women would have. I'm not most women. No. His voice was soft. I'm beginning to see that. Then the mask was back, the walls rebuilt, and he opened the door onto the chaos of the ballroom beyond. They had 1 month. 1 month of pretending, of performing, of navigating the treacherous waters of London society as a supposedly engaged couple. Penelope had survived 3 seasons on wit and determination alone. She could survive this, she hoped. As they stepped into the crowd of well-wishers and curious onlookers, she felt Lord Thornbury's arm tighten slightly around hers. Whether it was for her benefit or his own, she couldn't tell. But somewhere beneath her anxiety and bewilderment, beneath the fear of exposure and the strangeness of her situation, she felt something else stirring. Curiosity. Who was this man, really? What was he hiding behind all that ice? What was the secret his grandmother held over him, and why did the mention of it make his eyes go dark with something that looked like pain? She had 1 month to find out. And despite everything, despite common sense and self-preservation, and the certainty that this could only end badly, Penelope found herself looking forward to it. The first week of their false engagement passed in a blur of social obligations that left Penelope simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. She had underestimated what it meant to be attached to a marquis. Suddenly, every hostess in London wanted her at their events. Invitations arrived at Lady Brightmore's townhouse in stacks, each one more elaborately worded than the last. Lady Brightmore herself vacillated between triumph at her protégé's spectacular catch and deep suspicion that something was not quite right. "You tripped into his arms," she said for perhaps the 20th time, watching Penelope dress for yet another evening engagement. And his grandmother announced the engagement immediately, without consulting anyone, without a proper courtship. The dowager is unconventional. Penelope examined her reflection in the mirror, noting the shadows beginning to form under her eyes. 3 balls in 4 days would do that to a person. She saw an opportunity and seized it. "But do you even like the man? Lord Thornbury is not... He is not known for warmth, Penelope. They call him the Marble Marquis. Yes, I've heard." Penelope turned from the mirror with a smile that she hoped was convincing. "He is not as cold as people say. He simply keeps his feelings private." This was, she had discovered, actually true. In public, Lord Thornbury was exactly what his reputation suggested: distant, formal, responding to conversation with monosyllables and dismissing social pleasantries with barely concealed impatience. But in the small moments between performances, when they found themselves briefly alone, she had glimpsed something else entirely. He had called on her 3 times that week, as propriety demanded. The first visit had been awkward, stilted, both of them too aware of the servants listening and Lady Brightmore hovering nearby. But by the 3rd visit, they had developed a kind of rhythm. He would ask about her day. She would answer honestly, rather than with the pretty lies society preferred. He would offer some dry observation about the people they had encountered. She would laugh, surprised each time by his hidden wit. He was funny. That was the most shocking discovery. Beneath all that ice, Lord Sebastian Ashworth had a sense of humour as dark and sharp as a winter midnight. "You're smiling," Lady Brightmore observed. "You smile whenever his name is mentioned. I'm beginning to think this engagement might not be the disaster I feared." Penelope's smile faltered. She couldn't tell Lady Brightmore the truth that the engagement was a performance, a month-long charade designed to satisfy a meddling grandmother and protect both their reputations. Every smile, every blush, every appearance of growing attachment was carefully calculated, wasn't it? "We should leave soon," she said, avoiding the implied question. "Lord Thornbury is sending his carriage at 8. The Countess of Ashford's musicale was exactly the sort of event Penelope had always dreaded: an evening of amateur performances by young ladies desperate to display their accomplishments, accompanied by polite applause and barely concealed yawns. But tonight, with Lord Thornbury seated beside her, she found herself almost enjoying it. "That was meant to be Mozart," he murmured, as a particularly unfortunate soprano concluded her aria. "I believe Mozart would object." "Shh!" Penelope pressed her lips together to suppress a laugh. "She's trying her best. Her best is a crime against music. You're terrible. I'm honest. There's a difference." The next performer was marginally better, a young woman with genuine talent at the pianoforte, playing a Beethoven sonata with surprising sensitivity. Penelope watched Lord Thornbury's face as the music filled the room and saw something unexpected: genuine appreciation. His expression softened almost imperceptibly, the hard lines around his mouth easing. "You like music," she said quietly. "I like good music. There's little enough of it in these drawing rooms. Do you play?" He was silent for a moment. "I used to. My sister and I would play duets when we were young. She had real talent, not like these girls, performing for the marriage market. Real talent. It was the first time he had mentioned a sister. Penelope filed the information away carefully, sensing that she had been offered something rare. What happened to her? The softness vanished from his face. She died. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But the way he said it, the careful flatness of his voice, the sudden tension in his shoulders, told her it wasn't long ago at all. Not emotionally. Whatever had happened to his sister, he was still carrying it. The performance ended, and polite applause scattered through the room. Lord Thornbury clapped mechanically, his expression once again a mask of aristocratic boredom. Shall we take some air? Penelope touched his arm lightly. I find the room rather warm. He looked at her sharply, as though suspecting a trap. Then something in her expression seemed to reassure him. Yes, he said. Air would be welcome. They made their way to the terrace, where a handful of other guests had gathered to escape the stuffiness of the drawing-room. The night was cool and clear, stars visible despite the London haze, and Penelope breathed deeply of the fresh air. You asked about her deliberately, Lord Thornbury said. My sister. I asked because you mentioned her. I didn't mean to pry. Everyone pries. It's what society does. I'm not society. I'm a merchant's daughter playing dress-up in a borrowed gown. She leaned against the terrace railing, looking out at the shadowed garden below. And you are a marquis pretending to court me. We're both performing, my lord. But that doesn't mean we can't be honest with each other when no one is watching. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. Her name was Catherine. She was 3 years younger than me, and she was light. Everywhere she went, she brought light. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. She fell in love with a man who seemed charming, but was actually a fortune hunter. I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. They eloped. Penelope waited, sensing there was more. He abandoned her within 6 months. She was pregnant, alone, and too proud to come home. By the time I found her, it was too late. She died in childbirth. And the child? His hands tightened further on the railing. The child survived. Something clicked into place. The trust his grandmother had mentioned, the hold she had over him, the desperation Penelope had glimpsed when the dowager issued her ultimatum. You're raising her, Penelope said quietly. Your sister's child. That's the secret, isn't it? That's why your grandmother's threat has power. He turned to look at her, his grey eyes unreadable in the moonlight. How did you know? You said she survived, present tense, and your grandmother mentioned a trust that you couldn't risk, a trust that secures certain futures. She shook her head. You're protecting her, from scandal, from society's judgment. That's why you've refused to marry any wife would expect to know about a child in your household, and the truth would come out. The truth would destroy her. His voice was raw. She's 4 years old, Miss Hartwell. 4 years old and already illegitimate in the eyes of the world. If society knew about her, she would be marked forever. No respectable school would take her, no decent family would receive her. She would be her mother's shame made flesh. So you keep her hidden, in the country, with a nurse who believes she's an orphaned, distant relation. I visit when I can, but it's never enough. It's never... He stopped, his voice breaking slightly. I failed Catherine. I won't fail her daughter. Penelope's heart ached with a pain that surprised her. This was not the cold, unfeeling man society believed him to be. This was a man who had built walls around himself to protect a child he loved, who had sacrificed his own happiness to shield an innocent girl from cruelty. "What's her name?" she asked softly. "Rose. Catherine named her Rose. Before the end. It's a beautiful name. She's a beautiful child." The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She has her mother's eyes, and her mother's laugh. Sometimes, when I'm with her, I can almost believe Catherine isn't really gone." They stood in silence, the noise of the musicale drifting faintly from behind them. Penelope wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer some comfort for the grief he so clearly still carried. But she sensed that would be too much, too soon. Instead, she said, "Thank you for telling me. You're the only person who knows, outside of my grandmother and Rose's nurse. I won't betray your trust. I know." He looked at her with something that might have been wonder. "I don't know how I know, but I do. You're not like other people, Miss Hartwell." "Penelope," she said, "if we're sharing secrets, you should call me Penelope." "Penelope." He said her name as though tasting it. "Then you should call me Sebastian, at least when we're alone." "Sebastian." She tried it out, feeling the weight of it on her tongue. "It suits you, strong and serious. And Penelope suits you, clever and resourceful, the wife who waited, who saw through all disguises. I didn't wait for anyone, and I'm not a wife. No." His eyes met hers, and something shifted in the air between them. "Not yet." The moment stretched, charged with possibility. Penelope felt her breath catch, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. Then voices approached from inside, and they stepped apart as though burned. "We should return," Sebastian said, his voice once again controlled, "before we're missed." "Yes." Penelope smoothed her skirts, trying to calm the flutter in her chest. "We should." But as they walked back into the drawing room, she felt his hand brush against hers, the lightest touch, easily dismissed as accidental. And she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that something had changed. This was no longer just a performance. The second week brought new complications. Lady Brightmore received a letter from Penelope's mother, full of excitement about the engagement and questions about when the family might meet their daughter's intended. Penelope had written home with carefully edited versions of events, emphasizing Lord Thornbury's title and respectability, while glossing over the rather irregular circumstances of their betrothal. Now she sat at her writing desk, trying to compose a response that was neither outright lies nor damaging truths. "You look troubled," Sebastian observed. He had called again, ostensibly to take her for a drive in the park. Lady Brightmore had retreated to give them privacy, though Penelope suspected she was listening at the door. "My mother wants to visit London, to meet you and begin planning the wedding." "Ah." "Yes. Ah." Penelope set down her pen. "How does one explain to one's mother that the engagement is temporary? That there will be no wedding? That her daughter has spent the past fortnight lying to everyone she knows? One doesn't explain." Sebastian moved to stand beside her chair, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "One postpones. Families are complicated. She will understand if you tell her the timing isn't right. The timing will never be right for the truth. Then perhaps the truth needs to change." Penelope looked up at him sharply. "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I mean, this past fortnight has been unexpected. You have been unexpected. I find myself—" He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind. I'm speaking out of turn." "No." She stood, facing him properly. "What do you find yourself?" "Looking forward to seeing you." The words seemed pulled from him reluctantly. "Thinking about you when you're not there. Wondering what you would say about things, how you would laugh at some absurdity I've witnessed. Sebastian, I know what we agreed. 1 month of performance, then we part ways. I haven't forgotten. His jaw tightened. But I'm beginning to wish I could. The admission hung in the air between them. Penelope felt her carefully constructed defenses wavering, the walls she had built to protect herself from exactly this moment. She had told herself it was just a game, just a performance. She would play her role, collect the social benefits, and walk away unscathed at the end. She would not allow herself to feel anything real for this cold, complicated man. But standing here, close enough to see the vulnerability in his grey eyes, she knew she had already failed. "I'm frightened," she admitted. "Of me? Of this? Of whatever is happening between us?" She wrapped her arms around herself. "I've spent my whole life being careful, Sebastian, being practical, protecting myself from disappointment by never hoping for too much. And now I find myself hoping, and it terrifies me." He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I've been terrified since the moment you fell into my arms," he said. "I had built a life without risk, without feeling, without connection. And then you appeared, and suddenly—" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want something." "What do you want?" "You." The word was raw, honest. "I want you, Penelope. Not as a performance. Not for my grandmother's benefit. For myself." She should pull away. She should remind him of their agreement, maintain her boundaries, protect herself from the inevitable pain of wanting something she couldn't have. A marquis did not marry a merchant's daughter. Not really. Not in any world that mattered. But his hand was warm on her face, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "The worst. We agreed. I know what we agreed." He stepped closer. "Tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me this is still just a performance, and I'll believe you." She should tell him. She should end this before it went any further, before she fell so deep that climbing out became impossible. "I can't," she said instead. "I can't tell you that." "Because it would be a lie." The door opened. They sprang apart as Lady Brightmore entered, her expression a careful study in discretion that suggested she had seen everything. "Lord Thornbury," she said smoothly, "your carriage is waiting, I believe, and Penelope has a fitting this afternoon that really cannot be postponed." "Of course." Sebastian's mask was back in place, his voice cool and composed. "I wouldn't dream of interfering with Miss Hartwell's schedule. I shall call again tomorrow, if that's acceptable." "Perfectly acceptable." He bowed to Lady Brightmore, then turned to Penelope with eyes that held a promise. "Until tomorrow, Miss Hartwell." "Until tomorrow, my lord." The formality felt absurd after what had just passed between them, but Lady Brightmore was watching, and the game had to continue. After he left, Lady Brightmore turned to Penelope with raised eyebrows. "Well," she said, "that looked rather more genuine than I expected." Penelope couldn't think of a single thing to say. The fitting was for her presentation gown, a requirement for being formally introduced at court, an honour that would have been unthinkable before her engagement to Sebastian. Lady Brightmore had insisted, arguing that a woman who was to become a marchioness needed to be properly presented to the Queen. Penelope stood motionless while the modiste adjusted pins and hemlines, trying to focus on the practical details rather than the chaos of her emotions. She was falling in love with Sebastian Ashworth. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt inevitable, as though she had been walking toward this moment her entire life, and only now could see the path she had taken. But love didn't change facts. Love didn't erase the social chasm between a marquis and a merchant's daughter. Love didn't undo the reality that their engagement was built on a lie, that his grandmother had engineered it, that they had agreed from the start it would end. "You're very quiet today." The modiste, a French woman named Madame Fournier, observed her in the mirror. "Nervous about the presentation?" "Among other things." "Lord Thornbury is a fortunate man." Madame Fournier smiled. "I have dressed many brides, mademoiselle, and few of them have had the glow you carry." "The glow?" "Love. It shows in the skin, the eyes. No cosmetic can replicate it." Penelope caught her own reflection, flushed cheeks, bright eyes, a softness to her expression that she barely recognized. Oh God, she was in love with him. And somehow, impossibly, he seemed to be in love with her too. The question was what they were going to do about it. The third week brought answers, though not the ones Penelope expected. Sebastian arrived at Lady Brightmoor's townhouse with an unusual request. He wanted Penelope to meet his grandmother properly, not at a ball or social event, but privately, at the Thornbury townhouse. "She's been asking about you," he explained, as their carriage wound through Mayfair. "She claims she wants to know the woman her grandson has chosen." Chosen is a generous word, given the circumstances. "She doesn't know that." He paused. "Or rather, she pretends not to know. My grandmother sees everything, including things that haven't happened yet." That sounds ominous. She is ominous, but she also genuinely cares about my happiness in her own manipulative way. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "She'll like you, Penelope. How could she not?" The Thornbury townhouse was imposing 4 stories of pale stone and tall windows, a black iron fence guarding a perfectly manicured front garden. Penelope had expected grandeur, but she wasn't prepared for the sheer weight of history that seemed to press down from every carved cornice and polished balustrade. "I know," Sebastian said, watching her face. "It's absurd. It's magnificent. It's a prison, dressed up in gilt and marble." He helped her down from the carriage. "I've always preferred the country estate. Fewer ghosts." The dowager received them in a drawing-room that managed to be both intimidating and surprisingly warm. Silk-covered walls in deep blue, fresh flowers on every surface. Afternoon light streaming through tall windows. The dowager herself sat in a high-backed chair that might have been a throne, her white hair perfectly arranged, her black dress impeccable. "Miss Hartwell." She extended a hand without rising. "I am pleased you could join us." Penelope curtsied, then took the offered hand. "The pleasure is mine, my lady." "Is it? I rather thought I forced you into this situation." The dowager's eyes sparkled with something that might have been humour. "But you've made the best of it, haven't you? You and my grandson have been quite convincing." "Grandmother," Sebastian's voice carried a warning. "Oh, hush. We're all intelligent people here. We know this engagement began as a farce." She gestured for Penelope to sit. "What interests me is what it's becoming." Penelope sat in the indicated chair, uncomfortably aware that she was being evaluated. The dowager's gaze was sharp, missing nothing the way Penelope's hands folded in her lap, the slight flush on her cheeks, the quick glance she couldn't help casting toward Sebastian. "You've developed feelings for him," the dowager observed. "Real feelings." "Grandmother, that's hardly—" "And he has developed feelings for you. I can see it in both of you. You're terrible liars, both of you, when it comes to matters of the heart." The silence that followed was painful. Penelope felt exposed, all her carefully guarded emotions suddenly laid bare before this formidable old woman. "I know about Rose," she said finally. The dowager's eyebrows rose. "Do you?" "Sebastian told me. About Catherine, about her death, about the child he's been protecting." Penelope lifted her chin. "And I think it's the bravest thing I've ever heard." Something shifted in the dowager's expression. The evaluating sharpness softened into something almost like approval. Most women would run from such a scandal. Most women are fools. Indeed they are. The dowager smiled a real smile, warm and unexpected. I chose well, it seems, even if the method was unorthodox. You planned this. Sebastian's voice was flat. All of it. You saw Penelope fall, and you saw an opportunity. I saw a woman who wasn't afraid of you. Do you know how rare that is? You've spent years cultivating that cold exterior, scaring away anyone who might get close. But Miss Hartwell wasn't scared. She was annoyed. The dowager laughed. I knew immediately she was exactly what you needed. I don't need anyone. Everyone needs someone, Sebastian. You've just forgotten how to admit it. Penelope watched this exchange with growing understanding. The dowager wasn't a villain, manipulating her grandson for sport. She was a grandmother who loved deeply and worried constantly, who saw her only surviving family member wasting his life in isolation and loneliness. I would like to meet Rose, Penelope said quietly. Both Sebastian and his grandmother turned to her with identical expressions of surprise. She's in the country, Sebastian said. It's a full day's journey. I know, but if we're to... She hesitated over the word. If we're to be married, truly married, I should meet her. She's your family. She would be my family too. You would accept her? The dowager's voice was sharp. Despite everything? Despite what society would say? Society can go hang. Penelope heard the steel in her own voice. That child has done nothing wrong. She shouldn't be punished for the circumstances of her birth. And if anyone tried to hurt her because of gossip and scandal, they would have to go through me first. The dowager was quiet for a long moment. Then she rose from her chair, crossed to where Penelope sat, and did something entirely unexpected. She embraced her. Welcome to the family, my dear, she said softly. I think you're going to be magnificent. But the path to happiness was never smooth. 3 days later, Penelope was dressing for an evening at the opera when Lady Brightmore entered her room with an expression that suggested bad news. Lord Ashford called while you were out, she said carefully. Sebastian's friend. The one he was speaking with at the Harrington ball. I remember him. What did he want? He wanted to warn you, apparently. He feels that Sebastian is making a mistake, and he believes you should know it. Penelope's hands stilled on her jewelry box. A mistake? He said... Lady Brightmore hesitated. He said that Sebastian is not thinking clearly, that his grandmother has manipulated him into believing this engagement is what he wants, that when he comes to his senses, he will realize he cannot possibly marry so far beneath his station. The words hit like physical blows. Penelope forced herself to breathe. He said that marrying you would be social suicide, that his friends would abandon him, that doors would close, that his children would carry the stigma of having a mother in trade. Lady Brightmore's voice was gentle but relentless. He said that Sebastian knows all this, and the only reason he's proceeding is because his grandmother has left him no choice. That's not true. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Sebastian had agreed to the engagement because of his grandmother's threat. He had been furious at first, trapped by circumstances beyond his control. What if his recent warmth was just another performance? What if he was simply making the best of a bad situation, telling her what she wanted to hear because it was easier than fighting? I'm not saying it is true, Lady Brightmore said. I'm telling you what Lord Ashford believes, and I think you should consider the possibility that he knows Sebastian better than you do. Sebastian told me, men tell women many things when they want something. I've seen it 100 times, Penelope. A young woman of limited means, a powerful man who seems to offer everything she's ever wanted. It rarely ends well. Sebastian isn't like that. How do you know? Lady Brightmoor's voice was kind but firm. You've known him for 3 weeks. His friends have known him for decades. If they believe he's making a mistake, perhaps you should listen. After Lady Brightmoor left, Penelope sat at her vanity and stared at her reflection. Lord Ashford's words echoed in her mind. Social suicide. Marry so far beneath his station. The stigma of having a mother in trade. She had always known these were the realities of her situation. She had spent 3 seasons navigating the subtle cruelties of a society that smiled at her face while whispering behind her back. She had never been allowed to forget that she didn't truly belong. And now she had dared to hope that Sebastian saw past all of that. That he wanted her for herself, not despite her background but regardless of it. But what if Lord Ashford was right? What if Sebastian was simply trapped, making the best of a situation his grandmother had forced upon him? What if the warmth she had seen was just another performance, and the cold, distant man she had first met was the real Sebastian after all? The doubts multiplied like shadows in candlelight. Every tender moment, every shared confidence, every touch and glance and whispered word, were they real? Or had she been fooling herself, seeing what she wanted to see because she was desperate to believe? She thought of her own performance, the witty, charming Penelope Hartwell she presented to society, the armor she had constructed to protect herself from rejection. What if Sebastian had his own armor? What if she had never seen the real man beneath it all? At the opera that night, Penelope sat beside Sebastian in his family's private box and tried to behave normally. It was impossible. Every time he leaned close to whisper a comment about the performance, she heard Lord Ashford's voice. Social suicide. Every time his hand brushed hers, she wondered if the touch was genuine or calculated. "You're quiet tonight." Sebastian's voice was low, his eyes on the stage but his attention clearly on her. "I'm tired." "That's not it." He turned to look at her properly. "Something's wrong. What is it?" The concern in his voice sounded real, but it had always sounded real, and she no longer knew what to believe. "Nothing's wrong. I'm simply enjoying the music." "Penelope." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Please, tell me what's bothering you." She should confront him. She should repeat what Lord Ashford had said and demand the truth. But the private box wasn't private. His grandmother sat just a few feet away, pretending to watch the opera while undoubtedly listening to every word. "Later," she said. "We'll talk later." The rest of the evening was torture. She went through the motions, applauding at appropriate moments, making conversation during intermission, smiling when people offered congratulations on her engagement, but her heart wasn't in it. Lord Ashford found her during the second intermission, when Sebastian had stepped away to fetch refreshments. "Miss Hartwell," he bowed, all propriety. "I trust you received my message." "I did." "And have you reconsidered?" Penelope looked at him, handsome, polished, perfectly at ease in this glittering world. He had been Sebastian's friend for years. He knew things about Sebastian that she would never know. "What exactly would you have me do, my lord? Cry off the engagement and shame myself before all of London? I would have you consider what you're getting yourself into." His voice was low, urgent. "Sebastian is not himself lately. His grandmother has been manipulating him for months, and this engagement is the culmination of her schemes. When the glamour fades, when reality sets in, he will resent you. And you will resent him. You don't know that. I know Sebastian. I've watched him push away everyone who might care about him for 5 years. You are not special, Miss Hartwell. You are simply the first person his grandmother managed to trap before he could escape." The words cut deep, because they echoed her own fears. She had wondered the same things, late at night when doubt crept in. What made her special? Why would Sebastian choose her when he had rejected so many others? The only answer that made sense was that he hadn't chosen her at all. He had been forced. "I appreciate your concern," she said stiffly, "but I believe I know Lord Thornbury better than you give me credit for." "Do you?" Lord Ashford smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Do you know about his sister's child? About the scandal he's been hiding for 4 years?" Penelope froze. I'll take that as a yes. "So you know, then, that any woman who marries him inherits that scandal, that any children you bear him will grow up in the shadow of illegitimacy, that society will never fully accept you, not because of your own background, but because of his. Rose is an innocent child. Rose is a burden he's chosen to carry, a noble burden, perhaps, but a burden nonetheless. And you will carry it too, if you proceed with this marriage." Lord Ashford stepped closer. "Is that what you want, Miss Hartwell? A lifetime of scandal and whispers? A husband who married you because his grandmother gave him no choice?" Sebastian returned before Penelope could respond, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. He stopped when he saw Lord Ashford, his expression darkening. "William." "Sebastian." Lord Ashford nodded coolly. "I was just congratulating Miss Hartwell on her good fortune." "Were you?" "Indeed. She's secured quite a prize, though I wonder if she fully understands what comes with it." The tension between them was palpable. Penelope felt suddenly that she was watching something she wasn't meant to see, a history of friendship and betrayal, of wounds that had never properly healed. "I think Miss Hartwell understands perfectly well," Sebastian said. His voice was ice. "And I think you should leave before you say something you regret." "I've already said it." Lord Ashford met Sebastian's eyes without flinching. "The question is whether she's wise enough to listen." He walked away without another word. Sebastian watched him go, his jaw tight. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing that matters. Penelope, not here." She was suddenly desperate to escape, to be somewhere quiet where she could think. "Please, Sebastian, not here." He searched her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll call for the carriage." But Penelope didn't go with him to the carriage. Instead, she claimed a headache and retreated to Lady Brightmoor's townhouse alone, refusing Sebastian's offer to accompany her. His hurt was visible, even through the cold mask he wore in public. "Have I done something wrong?" he asked quietly, as she climbed into Lady Brightmoor's carriage. "No. I need to think. About what William said. About everything." She closed the carriage door before he could respond, and as the horses pulled away, she watched him through the window standing on the steps of the opera house, alone, his face a study in confusion and concern. She had never hated herself more. Back in her room, Penelope tried to sort through the chaos of her thoughts. Lord Ashford's words echoed alongside everything Sebastian had told her. 2 versions of the same man, one cold and calculating, marrying her because he had no choice, the other warm and vulnerable, opening his heart despite years of self-imposed isolation. Which was true? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe people were more complicated than any simple story could capture. She thought about her own history of performance, of putting on masks to protect herself from rejection. She had always assumed that if someone saw the real her, the scared, lonely, desperate her, they would turn away. So she had hidden behind wit and charm, keeping everyone at arm's length. But Sebastian had seen through it. He had said so himself. "You're not like other people." He had recognized her armor because he wore armor of his own. And wasn't that exactly what Lord Ashford had described? A man who pushed everyone away, who refused to let anyone close? The difference was in the interpretation. Lord Ashford saw coldness as Sebastian's true nature. Penelope had come to believe it was a defense mechanism, a way of protecting himself from more pain. But what if she was wrong? What if she had seen what she wanted to see because the alternative was too painful to contemplate? She sat at her writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. Then she set it aside, unused. What was there to write? Who could she ask for guidance? The only person who might know the truth was Sebastian himself, and she wasn't brave enough to ask him. The next morning brought a letter. Not from Sebastian, from his grandmother. The dowager's handwriting was elegant and precise, and her message was characteristically direct. Miss Hartwell, I am aware that Lord Ashford spoke to you last evening. I am equally aware of what he likely said, as he has expressed similar sentiments to me on multiple occasions. William Ashford has been Sebastian's friend since childhood, and he believes he is acting in Sebastian's best interests. He is wrong. His view of my grandson is coloured by years of watching Sebastian punish himself for Catherine's death. He has forgotten that the cold, distant man Sebastian has become is not the man he was born to be. You see past the mask. I saw it the moment you fell into his arms, the way you looked at him with irritation rather than fear, the way you demanded honesty rather than accepting what he chose to show you. That is rare, and that is what Sebastian needs. Do not let William's doubts become your own. Do not let your own fears convince you that you are unworthy of love. Sebastian cares for you. Truly. I may have engineered your meeting, but I could not engineer what has grown between you. That is real, and it is worth fighting for. If you have doubts, speak to him directly. He has spent too many years hiding from the people who might love him. Be braver than he has been. Ask him the questions you are afraid to ask, and trust yourself to recognize the truth when you hear it. Yours, the Dowager Marchioness of Thornbury. Penelope read the letter 3 times. Then she set it down and stared at the wall. Be braver than he has been. She had never been brave. She had been clever, resourceful, adaptable, but brave? Brave meant risking something. Brave meant opening yourself to the possibility of pain. Brave meant asking questions when you weren't sure you wanted to hear the answers. But she thought of Sebastian's face last night, watching her carriage pull away. The confusion, the concern, the vulnerability he couldn't quite hide. If he was acting, he was the best actor she had ever seen. And if he wasn't, if he truly cared for her, then she was throwing away something precious, because she was too afraid to believe in it. She stood up from her desk with sudden resolution. She would find Sebastian. She would ask him directly, face to face, whether his feelings were real or performed. She would be brave, even if it terrified her. And then a knock came at her door. "Miss?" Molly's voice was uncertain. "Lord Thornbury is here. He says it's urgent." Sebastian was in the drawing room, pacing like a caged animal. His usually immaculate appearance was dishevelled cravat askew, hair disordered, dark circles under his eyes suggesting a sleepless night. He stopped when Penelope entered, his grey eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I need to know," he said without preamble. "I need to know what William told you, what he said that made you look at me like you didn't know me anymore." "Sebastian, because I saw it. In the carriage when you pulled away. You looked at me like I was a stranger, like everything between us had been erased." His voice cracked. "And I've been awake all night trying to understand what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong. Then why?" He crossed the room to stand before her. "Why did you leave like that? Why won't you talk to me?" The vulnerability in his voice undid her. This was not a man who was performing. This was a man who was terrified, who had let down his walls and now feared that it had been a mistake. "Lord Ashford said—" She hesitated. "He said you're only marrying me because your grandmother left you no choice, that you would never have chosen me on your own, that when reality sets in, you'll resent me." Sebastian's expression shifted through several emotions: anger, understanding, and finally a terrible sadness. William doesn't know me anymore, he said quietly. He knows the man I've pretended to be for 5 years. He doesn't know the man I was before Catherine died, or the man I'm trying to become now. But is he right? Would you have chosen me, if not for your grandmother's scheme? I would never have met you, if not for my grandmother's scheme. He reached for her hands. But Penelope, that's not the same thing. I didn't choose to fall into your arms at the Harrington ball. I didn't choose to spend a month pretending to court you. But everything since then, every conversation, every moment, every feeling, has been my choice. How can I know that's true? You can't. The words were stark, honest. You can't know for certain, any more than I can know that your feelings for me are real. We're both taking a leap of faith. We're both risking something. What are you risking? Everything. His hands tightened on hers. I've spent 5 years protecting myself from feeling anything. I built walls so high that nothing could touch me. And then you appeared, and you didn't just knock on those walls, you walked right through them like they weren't there. Sebastian, I love you. The words fell into the silence between them. I love you, and it terrifies me, and I understand if you can't believe it. I haven't given you much reason to trust anything I say, but it's true. It's the truest thing I've ever said. Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. Lord Ashford said, Lord Ashford can go to hell. Sebastian's voice was fierce. He doesn't get to decide my future. My grandmother doesn't get to decide my future. The only person whose opinion matters is yours. Mine? Yours. He brought her hands to his lips and kissed them. Tell me what you want, Penelope. Not what you think you should want, not what society says you should want. What do you actually want? She thought of all the years of performing, of hiding, of protecting herself from disappointment by never hoping for too much. She thought of the merchant's daughter, who had convinced herself that love was impractical, that marriage was just a transaction, that the best she could hope for was comfortable affection. And she thought of how it felt when Sebastian looked at her like she was the only person in the room. How it felt when he laughed at her jokes, when he shared his secrets, when he trusted her with the most painful parts of his past. I want you, she said. I want this to be real. It is real. I want to believe that. Then believe it. He cupped her face in his hands. Believe it, Penelope. Take the leap. I promise I'll catch you. She looked into his grey eyes, the eyes that had seemed so cold when she first met him, but now held nothing but warmth, and she made her choice. I believe you, she whispered. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was 5 years of isolation and loneliness, 3 weeks of growing feeling, and 1 night of terrible doubt all colliding in a single moment. Penelope felt herself melting into him, all her fears dissolving in the heat of it. When they finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said again. I will say it as many times as you need to hear it. I love you too. The words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar but right. I've never said that before, to anyone. Neither have I. Not since Catherine. They stood there, holding each other, letting the moment stretch. The morning light streamed through the windows, and somewhere outside, London carried on with its business, oblivious to the fact that 2 people had just decided to stop being afraid. We should tell your grandmother, Penelope said finally, that this isn't a performance anymore. I think she already knows. Sebastian smiled. She sent you a letter, didn't she? How did you? Because she sent me one too, telling me to stop being a coward and go win you back. Penelope laughed despite herself. She's a menace. She's a genius. He kissed her forehead. And she's going to be insufferably smug when she finds out she was right. But even as Penelope surrendered to happiness, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. Lord Ashford's words had been defeated, but not destroyed. The doubts had been answered, but not erased. And somewhere, in the complicated tangle of Sebastian's past, there were still secrets waiting to be discovered. The Dowager's letter had told her to be brave, to ask questions, to trust herself. But some questions had answers that changed everything. That evening, as Penelope prepared for another ball, she found herself thinking about Catherine's daughter, little Rose, hidden away in the country, protected from scandal by Sebastian's silence. She would be part of Rose's life now. She had accepted that, even welcomed it. But she realized she knew almost nothing about the child beyond her name and age. She had never seen her portrait. She had never heard Sebastian speak of her daily life, her personality, her needs. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask. Tomorrow, she would learn everything there was to know about the little girl who would become her stepdaughter. But tomorrow was too late for some questions, because somewhere across London, Lord William Ashford was composing a letter of his own, a letter to a journalist at the scandal sheets, detailing the existence of an illegitimate child hidden by one of the Tun's most prominent families. The secret Sebastian had protected for 4 years was about to be exposed, and everything Penelope thought she had secured was about to fall apart. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning. Penelope was taking breakfast with Lady Brightmore when the first whispers reached them, a footman who had heard from a maid, who had heard from a delivery boy that something shocking had appeared in the morning papers. Lady Brightmore sent for copies immediately, and within the hour, the full extent of the disaster became clear. The story was everywhere. Every gossip sheet, every scandal rag, every publication that thrived on the misfortunes of the powerful. The details were lurid and largely accurate. The late Lady Catherine Ashworth's secret pregnancy, her abandonment by a fortune-hunting husband, her death in childbirth, and most damning of all, the existence of an illegitimate child currently being raised in secret at the Marquis of Thornbury's country estate. The articles didn't name Lord Ashford as their source, but Penelope knew. She knew with a cold certainty that settled in her chest like a stone. He had warned her. He had tried to drive her away with words, and when that failed, he had turned to more destructive methods. "This is catastrophic," Lady Brightmore said, setting down the paper with trembling hands. "Absolutely catastrophic. The child's existence was supposed to remain secret. It was never going to remain secret forever." Penelope's voice was surprisingly steady. "Secrets like this always come out eventually. But the timing, just as your engagement was becoming real—" Lady Brightmore shook her head. "This will change everything, Penelope. Society will never accept this child, and any woman who marries Lord Thornbury will be tainted by association." "I know. You could withdraw. The engagement was announced under irregular circumstances. No one would blame you for reconsidering in light of this scandal." Penelope looked at her sponsor with something approaching pity. Lady Brightmore meant well. She had spent her life navigating the treacherous waters of society, learning to bend with every shifting current. She couldn't imagine choosing scandal over safety. "I'm not withdrawing," Penelope said. "Sebastian needs me now more than ever." "Penelope, he's been protecting that child for 4 years. He's sacrificed everything, his reputation, his chance at happiness, his own peace of mind to keep her safe. And now someone has betrayed him in the worst possible way." She stood, reaching for her shawl. "I need to go to him." "You'll be seen. You'll be associated with the scandal." "I'm already associated with it. I'm his betrothed." She met Lady Brightmore's eyes. "And I intend to remain so." The Thornbury townhouse was under siege. Carriages lined the street, some carrying concerned friends, others carrying curious gossips, eager for a glimpse of the disgraced Marquis. Penelope's arrival caused a flurry of whispers and pointed stares, but she walked through them with her head held high. The butler admitted her immediately, his professional composure cracking just slightly around the edges. "Miss Hartwell, Lord Thornbury is in his study. He asked not to be disturbed, but I believe he would make an exception for you." "And the Dowager Marchioness?" "In her chambers. She has been unwell since the news broke." Penelope found Sebastian exactly where the butler had indicated, standing at the window of his study with his back to the door. He didn't turn when she entered. "I told Wilson I wasn't receiving visitors." "I'm not a visitor. I'm your betrothed." He turned then, and she saw the devastation on his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw shadowed with stubble. His entire bearing that of a man who had just watched his world collapse. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You should be at Lady Brightmoor's, composing a letter to end our engagement. Something dignified but firm. You could blame my grandmother's manipulation. No one would fault you for it." "I'm not ending our engagement." "Penelope," his voice cracked, "you don't understand. This changes everything. Rose's existence is public knowledge now. Any woman who marries me inherits that scandal. Any children we have will be raised alongside an illegitimate cousin who will never be fully accepted. Your family's reputation, your future, everything you've worked for, can go hang." She crossed the room to stand before him. "I told your grandmother the same thing, and I meant it. I don't care about scandal. I don't care about what society thinks. I care about you, and I care about that little girl who is probably terrified right now because she doesn't understand why her world is falling apart." Sebastian stared at her as though she were speaking a foreign language. "You would stay? Even now? Did you think I wouldn't? I thought—" He swallowed hard. "Everyone leaves. Eventually. When things get difficult, when the cost becomes too high, everyone leaves." "I'm not everyone." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his unshaven jaw. "I love you, Sebastian. Not the title, not the fortune, not the social position. You. And loving someone means staying when things are hard." He pulled her into his arms with a desperation that stole her breath. She felt him shaking, felt the wetness of tears against her hair, and she held him while the walls he had rebuilt overnight came crumbling down again. "I'm so sorry," he said into her hair. "I never wanted to drag you into this. I should have told you sooner, given you the chance to leave before. You told me when it mattered. You trusted me with your secrets. That's all I needed." They stood there for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Then Sebastian pulled back, his expression hardening into something like determination. "I know who did this." "Lord Ashford." "Yes." The word was clipped, cold. "William has been warning me against this engagement since the beginning. When words failed, he apparently decided to take more drastic action." "What will you do?" "Confront him. Demand an explanation. And then—" He stopped, his hands clenching at his sides. "I don't know. I've known William since we were children. He was the closest thing I had to a brother, and he's betrayed me in a way I can barely comprehend. He thought he was protecting you. By destroying Rose's chance at a normal life, by exposing a 4-year-old child to the cruelty of society's judgment." Sebastian's voice rose. "There is no protection in what he's done. There is only destruction." Penelope didn't argue. Lord Ashford's actions were indefensible, regardless of his motivations. Whatever friendship had once existed between him and Sebastian was over now, shattered beyond any hope of repair. "What about Rose?" she asked. "Does she know?" "I've sent word to her nurse, warning them to keep her inside and away from any visitors. But she'll find out eventually. She'll grow up knowing that her existence is a scandal, that her mother died in shame, that her uncle has spent years hiding her like a dirty secret. You weren't hiding her like a dirty secret. You were protecting her. Was I? Or was I just delaying the inevitable? He turned back to the window, staring out at the carriages still lining the street. Perhaps William was right about one thing. I should have faced this scandal years ago. I should have brought Rose into my household openly, defied society's judgment, let the whispers run their course. Instead, I hid her away and pretended that silence could protect her forever. You did what you thought was best. I did what was easiest. His voice was bitter. There's a difference. The Dowager Marchioness summoned them both to her chambers that afternoon. She looked smaller than Penelope had ever seen her, fragile somehow, despite the iron will that had always defined her. She was propped up against pillows in an enormous bed, her white hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale and drawn. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the chairs that had been arranged beside her bed. "Both of you. We have much to discuss." They sat. Sebastian reached for Penelope's hand, and she let him take it. "I have made inquiries," the Dowager said. The story was planted by William Ashford. He approached the journalists directly, providing documents and details that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of our family. "I know," Sebastian said flatly. "What you may not know is his reasoning. He came to see me last week, after Penelope fled the opera. He was concerned, genuinely concerned. I believe that you were making a decision you would regret. He thought that if the scandal broke now, before the wedding, Penelope would have cause to withdraw, and you would be freed from what he saw as a trap." "A trap?" Sebastian's laugh was hollow. "He thought he was saving me from a trap." He was wrong, obviously, but his intentions were not entirely malicious. He truly believes that your attachment to Miss Hartwell is a product of my manipulation, and that once the romance faded, you would come to resent her. His intentions are irrelevant. His actions have destroyed any chance Rose had at a normal life. Perhaps. The Dowager's eyes were sharp, despite her obvious fatigue. Or perhaps they have given her something better. Sebastian frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Rose has been hiding in shadows for 4 years. She has been raised by a nurse who loves her, but who is not family. She has seen her uncle only in stolen visits, always with the understanding that their relationship must remain secret. That is not a normal life, Sebastian. That is a half-life, defined by shame and concealment. It was the best I could do. It was the safest option, not the best one." The Dowager reached out to touch her grandson's hand. "You were so frightened of failing her the way you failed Catherine. You thought that if you could just keep her hidden, keep her safe from society's cruelty, she would be protected. But you cannot protect anyone from life itself. You can only prepare them to face it." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. "What would you have me do?" "What you should have done years ago. Bring her home. Acknowledge her publicly as your ward. Let society whisper and judge and disapprove, and then show them that their disapproval means nothing compared to the love of a family. The scandal. The scandal exists whether you hide from it or face it. You cannot unring this bell, Sebastian. The only question is whether you will cower in shame or stand tall and dare the world to condemn an innocent child." Penelope squeezed Sebastian's hand. "She's right," she said quietly. "I know she's right. Rose needs to be with family, not hidden away like a secret. And we can give her that, both of us, together." Sebastian looked at her with something like wonder. "You would accept her? Truly? As your own daughter?" "I already do." The words came easily because they were true. She had never met Rose, had only heard Sebastian speak of her, but she already loved the child who had inspired such devotion in the man she loved. When we marry, she becomes my family too, and family doesn't hide in shadows. The dowager smiled a real smile, tired but genuine. "I chose well," she murmured. "When I saw you fall into his arms, Miss Hartwell, I knew. I knew you were exactly what this family needed." "You are insufferably smug," Sebastian said, but there was no heat in it. "I have earned the right to be smug. I have spent 10 years trying to save you from yourself, and I have finally succeeded." She lay back against her pillows, suddenly exhausted. "Now go, both of you. There is much to be done, and I am an old woman who needs her rest." They confronted Lord Ashford that evening. He was at his club, holding court among a group of gentlemen who fell silent when Sebastian entered. The tension in the room was immediate and palpable. Everyone knew what had happened, and everyone was waiting to see how it would play out. "William," Sebastian's voice carried across the room. "A word." Lord Ashford rose with careful dignity. "Sebastian, I've been expecting you." "Have you? Then you know why I'm here." "I can guess." He glanced at Penelope, who had insisted on accompanying Sebastian despite his protests. "Miss Hartwell, I'm surprised you're still standing by him." "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because the scandal will destroy you both. Surely you must see that now. Whatever feelings you believe you have for each other, they cannot survive the weight of society's condemnation." "You speak as though you know something about feelings." Sebastian's voice was ice. "But a man who truly understood feelings would never have done what you did." "I did what I thought was necessary, what you were too blinded by your grandmother's schemes to do for yourself." Lord Ashford's composure cracked slightly. "You were about to make the worst mistake of your life, Sebastian. I couldn't stand by and watch you do it. So instead you exposed an innocent child to public shame. You took a 4-year-old girl and made her the subject of every gossip column in London. You destroyed any chance she might have had at a normal life because you disagreed with my choice of bride." "I didn't—" Lord Ashford stopped, uncertainty flickering across his face. "I didn't think about the child. I thought only of you. You thought only of yourself." Sebastian stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You thought of your own discomfort, your own disapproval, your own conviction that you knew what was best for me. You have always thought you knew what was best for me, William. Even when we were boys, you were always certain that your judgment was superior to mine. I was trying to protect you. From what? From love? From happiness? From the chance to build a life with a woman who sees me as I truly am?" Sebastian shook his head. "I don't need that kind of protection. I never did. She's a merchant's daughter, Sebastian. She has nothing to offer you. She has everything to offer me. Everything that matters." Sebastian glanced at Penelope, and his expression softened for just a moment. "She sees through my walls. She challenges me. She makes me want to be better than I am. And she loves me, not my title, not my fortune, not my position in society. Me. You barely know her. You've known her for less than a month. I've known you for 30 years, and until today, I thought I knew who you were. I thought I knew what our friendship meant." Sebastian's voice hardened. "I was wrong." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Ashford's face had gone pale, his aristocratic composure finally crumbling. "Sebastian." "We're done, William. Whatever friendship existed between us, whatever loyalty I might have felt, you destroyed it the moment you betrayed Rose. I will never forgive you for that." He turned to leave, taking Penelope's arm. At the door he paused. "If you ever come near my family again, my grandmother, my betrothed, my niece, I will destroy you, your reputation, your fortune, your place in society. I will tear it all down without hesitation or remorse." His grey eyes were cold as stone. "Do you understand?" Lord Ashford said nothing. He didn't need to. His expression said everything. They left him standing there, surrounded by witnesses who would carry the story of his humiliation to every drawing room in London. The wedding took place 3 weeks later. It was not the grand society affair that might have been expected for a marquis. Sebastian had decided that if society wished to condemn him for his choices, he would not give them the satisfaction of pretending to seek their approval. The ceremony was held at the Thornbury country estate, with only family and closest friends in attendance. Penelope's parents came from London, still bewildered by the speed and strangeness of their daughter's courtship, but unable to deny the obvious happiness on her face. Her father, a practical man who had built his fortune through shrewd judgment of character, took one look at the way Sebastian watched Penelope and pronounced himself satisfied. "He loves you," Thomas Hartwell said bluntly, pulling his daughter aside before the ceremony. "Anyone can see it. And you love him." "I do." "Then nothing else matters. Not the scandal, not the whispers, not the ridiculous opinions of people who think they're better than you because their grandfathers happen to have titles." He kissed her forehead. "You've always known your own mind, Penelope. Trust it now." The dowager presided over the proceedings from a chair that might as well have been a throne, her satisfaction evident in every aspect of her bearing. She had won. Her decade-long campaign to see her grandson happily married had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations, and she was not about to let anyone forget it. But the most important attendee was the smallest. Rose had arrived at the estate 2 weeks before the wedding, brought from her hiding place by Sebastian himself. Penelope had been terrified of their first meeting. What if the child didn't like her? What if she saw Penelope as an intruder, a threat to her relationship with her uncle? She needn't have worried. Rose was small for her age, with her mother's dark hair and her uncle's grey eyes, eyes that held a wariness born of years of uncertainty. She had been told that she was going to live with her Uncle Sebastian now, that he was marrying a nice lady who wanted to be her new mamma, and that everything was going to be different from now on. Different frightened her. Penelope could see that immediately. So instead of trying to win the child over with gifts or promises, Penelope simply sat down on the nursery floor and started building a tower with the wooden blocks that were scattered there. Rose watched her for a long moment. Then, very carefully, she added a block to the tower. "It's going to fall," she said. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Maybe," Penelope agreed, "but we can always build it again." They built 3 towers together that afternoon. The first 2 fell, and Rose laughed each time, a small, surprised laugh, as though she wasn't quite sure laughter was allowed. The 3rd tower stood. "It's tall," Rose said, looking up at it with wondering eyes. "We built it together. That's why it's strong." Rose considered this for a moment. Then she reached out and took Penelope's hand. "I like you," she said solemnly. "You don't pretend." "Neither do you." "Uncle Sebastian says I'm going to call you Mamma. Is that true?" Penelope's heart clenched. "Only if you want to. Only when you're ready." "What if I'm never ready?" "Then you can call me Penelope, or Penny, or that lady who builds towers." She smiled. "Whatever feels right." Rose thought about this. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied. "Can we build another tower?" "As many as you want." The wedding ceremony was simple and beautiful. Penelope wore a gown of pale blue silk, not white, because she had never been traditional, and saw no reason to start now. Her hair was dressed with fresh flowers from the estate gardens, and she carried a bouquet of roses that Rose had helped her select. Sebastian waited at the altar, looking so handsome in his dark coat and pristine cravat that Penelope nearly forgot how to walk. But when their eyes met across the chapel, everything else faded away. The guests, the scandal, the uncertain future, none of it mattered. Only him. Only them. The vows were traditional, but their meaning had never felt less traditional. When Sebastian promised to love and cherish her, Penelope saw the truth of it in his eyes. When she promised to be his partner in all things, she meant it with every fibre of her being. And when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the kiss that followed was neither brief nor proper. "I love you," Sebastian murmured against her lips. "I love you too." She smiled up at him, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "Even if you did trap me into this marriage by catching me when I fell, I believe you trapped me, you and your treacherous hem. A hem can only do so much. The rest was pure luck." Luck. He kissed her again, soft and sweet. Or perhaps something more. The wedding breakfast was held in the estate's great hall, with tables laden with food and drink, and guests mingling in the warm spring sunshine that streamed through the tall windows. Penelope found herself overwhelmed by congratulations, some sincere, some merely polite, all of them evidence that they had somehow survived the scandal. Not unscathed. They would never be fully unscathed. There would always be whispers. Always be those who looked down their noses at the merchant's daughter who had married above her station, and the marquis who had publicly acknowledged an illegitimate ward. But they had survived, and that was more than either of them had expected. Rose stayed close to Penelope throughout the breakfast, her small hand clutching Penelope's skirt whenever the crowd became overwhelming. The child was still adjusting to her new life, still uncertain of her place in this unfamiliar world. But whenever she looked up at Penelope, there was trust in her grey eyes. It was enough. It was more than enough. "Lady Thornbury." The title startled her. She turned to find the dowager standing behind her, leaning on her cane but looking stronger than she had in weeks. "That's your name now," the dowager said with evident satisfaction. "Lady Thornbury." "The Marchioness of Thornbury. How does it feel?" "Strange," Penelope admitted. "I keep waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and tell me there's been a mistake." "There's been no mistake, only the correction of a very long error." The dowager's eyes were warm. "You have made my grandson happy, child. That is a gift I cannot repay." "You don't need to repay it. Sebastian's happiness is my happiness too." "Yes, I believe it is." The dowager reached out and touched Penelope's cheek. "I am very glad I announced your engagement that night, even if my methods were somewhat unorthodox." "Somewhat unorthodox is an understatement." "It worked, didn't it?" Penelope laughed despite herself. "Yes, it worked. Then I have no regrets." The dowager glanced across the room to where Sebastian was conversing with Penelope's father. "He hasn't smiled like that since before Catherine died. You gave that back to him. He gave me something too. He gave me a family, a real family, not just people I'm related to by blood, but people I've chosen to love. That's what family should be." The dowager's voice was soft. "People you choose. People who choose you back." That night, alone at last in the master suite, Penelope and Sebastian stood at the window and watched the stars emerge over the estate grounds. "Lady Thornbury," Sebastian said, testing the name on his tongue. "I still can't quite believe it." "Neither can I." Penelope leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of her nightgown. "This morning I was Miss Hartwell, a merchant's daughter with questionable prospects. Now I'm a marchioness. You were never a merchant's daughter with questionable prospects. You were always extraordinary. Society was simply too blind to see it. Society saw a woman who didn't know her place. Society was wrong about everything." He turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "I was wrong about everything. When you fell into my arms at that ball, I thought my life was over. My grandmother had finally trapped me, and I was going to spend the rest of my days tied to a woman I didn't know and didn't want. Romantic. I wasn't romantic then. I was bitter and cold and convinced that love was nothing but a trap waiting to spring. His thumbs traced circles on her shoulders. And then I got to know you. And everything changed. What changed? I did. He kissed her forehead. You changed me. You saw through all my walls and found the person underneath the person I had forgotten existed. You made me want to be that person again. You were always that person. You just needed someone to remind you. I needed you. He tilted her chin up, his grey eyes dark with emotion. I will always need you, Penelope. Whatever comes, scandal, hardship, the inevitable disappointments of life, I will need you beside me. I'll be there. Promise? I promise. She kissed him then, soft and slow, and full of all the things she couldn't say. I promise, Sebastian. For better or worse, in good times and bad, I will be there. They made love that night, with a tenderness that bordered on reverence, two people who had both believed themselves unworthy of love, finally discovering that they had been worthy all along. They simply hadn't found the right person to see it. And afterward, lying tangled together in the moonlight, Penelope felt something she had never felt before. Peace. 7 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the halls of Thornbury House. Penelope looked up from her correspondence, smiling at the familiar chaos. 3 sets of running feet thundered past her study door, accompanied by shrieks of excitement and what sounded like a barking dog. "No running in the halls!" she called out, knowing full well that her words would be ignored. "Yes, Mamma," came the chorus of voices, followed by more running and more shrieking. She shook her head and returned to her letter. Lady Brightmoor was visiting next week, and there were preparations to be made. Her former sponsor had become a dear friend over the years, one of the few people who had stood by them during the scandal and been rewarded with a front-row seat to their happiness. The door opened, and Sebastian appeared, looking only slightly more dishevelled than when she had seen him at breakfast. His cravat was askew, and there was what appeared to be jam on his sleeve. "The children," he said by way of explanation. "They ambushed me in the garden. All 3 of them. All 4, actually. Rose was the ringleader." Penelope laughed. Rose, now 11, had grown into a confident young woman who bossed her younger cousins around with cheerful authority. The years of uncertainty and hiding had left their marks, but they were fading now, replaced by the security of being truly loved and truly wanted. "She's practicing for her debut," Penelope said. "Only 7 more years until she enters society." "Don't remind me." Sebastian collapsed into the chair across from her desk. "I'm not ready to fend off suitors. You have plenty of time to prepare. I'll need every moment of it." He reached across the desk to take her hand. "How did we end up with 4 children and a dog and a house that never seems to be quiet?" "We fell in love." "Ah, yes. That." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Best decision I ever made." "You didn't make a decision. You caught me when I fell. And I've never let go." It was true. 7 years of marriage, and he still looked at her the same way he had on their wedding day, as though she were the most precious thing in his world. The scandal had faded to background noise, the whispers replaced by grudging respect, and in some cases, genuine friendship. The Marchioness of Thornbury had proven herself to be intelligent, capable, and fiercely protective of her family. Society had learned not to underestimate her. Their 3 biological children, Catherine, named for Sebastian's sister, followed by Thomas, and little Eleanor had been born healthy and happy, growing up alongside their cousin Rose in a household that valued love above propriety and kindness above social standing. The dowager had lived to see them all born, had held each baby in her arms and pronounced them perfect. She had died peacefully 2 winters ago, in the same bed where she had once summoned Sebastian and Penelope to lecture them about courage. Her last words had been characteristically imperious. Don't you dare forget to be happy." They hadn't forgotten. "The children want to go riding after lunch," Sebastian said. "Will you join us? If I can finish these letters. Surely Lady Brightmoor can wait another day." "Sebastian." "Penelope." He stood and circled the desk, pulling her to her feet. "The letters can wait. The children cannot. They're only young once, and I refuse to miss a moment of it." He was right, of course. He usually was, about things like this. The cold, distant man she had met at the Harrington ball had transformed into a devoted father who spent hours building towers with his daughters and teaching his son to ride and indulging Rose's every whim. He had reclaimed the warmth he had buried after Catherine's death, and he gave it freely to everyone he loved. "1 hour," she said. "Then I really must finish the letters." "1 hour," he agreed. "And then I'll help you finish them." "You'll help me?" "I'll sit across from you and provide moral support, possibly with tea." "That's not helping. It's emotional support, very important for successful correspondence." She laughed and let him lead her toward the door. As they passed the window, she caught a glimpse of the garden below. Rose teaching Catherine to do cartwheels, while Thomas and Eleanor chased the dog through the flower beds. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was everything she had never known she wanted. "Penny for your thoughts?" Sebastian asked, following her gaze. "I was thinking about the night we met, how I tripped on my hem and fell into your arms, and your grandmother announced our engagement before either of us could catch our breath. The most mortifying moment of my life. And mine." She leaned into him, feeling his arm wrap around her waist. "But also, the best thing that ever happened to me." "Agreed." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I still maintain that you fell into my arms deliberately." "I absolutely did not. My hem betrayed me." "Your hem was clearly working in conspiracy with my grandmother." "Perhaps." She smiled up at him. "Or perhaps it was fate." "I don't believe in fate." "What do you believe in?" He considered the question, his grey eyes warm with love and humour, and the quiet contentment of a man who had found exactly what he never knew he was looking for. "I believe in catching you when you fall," he said finally, "and I believe in never letting go." She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him a kiss full of 7 years of happiness and the promise of many more to come. "That's enough," she said. "That's more than enough." They walked out together to join their children in the garden, leaving the letters unfinished and the house in cheerful disarray. The sun was shining, the children were laughing, and somewhere in the family plot, the dowager was surely looking down with insufferable satisfaction. She had been right, after all, about all of it, and Penelope had never been more grateful to have tripped on her hem.